It's not in the face! Thank you.
Welcome to the Hey Not the Face show. We have some special guests for today's episode. I conducted a pair of interviews with two of the top attorneys in each of the respected fields. The first is with legendary boxing attorney Patrick English, in which we discussed the Ali Act, a bill he himself had a hand in crafting, as well as the new Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act. And the second interview is with super attorney James Quinn, an antitrust expert who has also represented athletes in each of the major league sports associations. He's on to discuss how competition impacts athletes' earning power. Note that for the Quinn interview, there was some technical difficulties, so it cut off a little early, but I think what we did record was well worth listening to. Before we get to Mr. English, I want to remind listeners, if you have not yet done so, to subscribe. And while this episode will be free, I highly suggest you become a paid member to get access to all our material. For example, on our previous episode, for the paid members, we included a breakdown of the current Zuffa boxing contracts. That's something you can't find anywhere else. And now let's get to the show. I'm happy to have on the Hey Not the Face podcast, Patrick English. If you are a boxing fan, you know the name, but for the MMA fans that listen to the show that might not be familiar with him, he is one of the biggest, if not the biggest attorney in the sport. Decades of experience. I believe it's 45 years or more now in legal experience. And he is a partner at Dines and English, LLC. And he worked with John McCain on the Ali Act and Boxing Professional Health and Safety Act back in the 90s. He has represented numerous promoters and fighters, even represented a MMA promotion in Bellator. So this is a man extremely knowledgeable in the subjects we're going to talk today. So I'm happy to have you on. Welcome, Patrick.
And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Well, I think the focus today is because there's this new bill being introduced, we're going to talk about, I guess, the current structure of boxing and what needs to be fixed. But the first thing I want to talk about is the Ali Act. It's something we talk about often on this show. It's been a focus of the show actually for a long time, but it's something I think a lot of people are not that familiar with. It's a bill that was passed, signed into law in 2000 that's supposed to provide economic protections to boxers. But the big complaint is it doesn't work. So my question to you, as someone more familiar with it, that's actually done Ali Act cases, has the Ali Act worked the way it was intended to work?
It works, but not as much as we all intended. There have been numerous referrals to different U.S. attorneys by the ABC, Association of Boxing Commissions, and the U.S. attorneys have not acted on those referrals. But in terms of civil litigation, I have personally done many cases successfully, and other attorneys have as well.
My understanding, speaking to Kurt Emhoff and as well as Rob Macy, who is with the Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association, which wanted to expand the Ali Act to MMA, is that a common thing that people don't understand is because of the right of private action, there are numerous incidents where boxers will send a letter basically threatening to sue a promoter or someone for a manager for violating the Ali Act. And that never really makes its way to the court or never makes it to trial because it's so clear cut a violation of the act that it is settled out of court. Is that true, or is that maybe misrepresented?
That is true.
Okay,
that does happen.
So
there have been court cases as well. I'm involved in a court case right now involving Don King. It is in court.
Yeah. Okay. I know. I guess because people often will bring up the Ali Act is never enforced, but when they say that, they mean it's never enforced by the Attorney General's office. It's enforced by the boxers themselves, which it leads to a problem. It's usually boxers that have more financial means than they'll bring the case forward. But still, it has.
Well, yeah, pretty much that's true, but not exclusively. So I've represented boxers who are of lesser means.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what problems were the Ali Act supposed to address
Okay.
I know it's an open-ended question, and then I guess what would you say was the parts that it kind of failed to address?
Well, the biggest problem was an unholy alliance between some promoters and managers. The most notable instance during that period of time was Don King and his son Carl King, where the manager was very closely affiliated with the manager. The promoter was affiliated with the manager, leading to non-representation. That was a big part of the Ali Act. There was also another major issue was there was bribery going on certain ratings organizations. That we know because it was proven in court in a case involving the IDF, which is now, I want to add, one of the better organizations. So there was a firewall provision involving both managers and promoters and ratings organizations. Those were two major points. Mm-hmm. There were some other economic points.
It was
one was to have boxers have a better understanding of the economics of the bouts in which they participated in. I did not like the way that particular clause ended up worded, but that was the purpose. That clause was added at the House level, not the Senate level.
Yeah. And my understanding for that clause, that disclosure clause, is that one of the problems is the promoter kind of gets to choose when he discloses that information. So for a lot of managers that are negotiating for their boxers, it might not help with the current negotiations, but at least you have knowledge for the next negotiations of what kind of money's floating around.
Yeah, that's exactly so. But the flaw is, in order to make sense of what the income is, you have to know what the expenses are. And it only refers to income.
Yeah, so it's a little bit weaker there. The one other thing I think I've been told by numerous people in boxing, I mean promoters and managers and some boxers themselves, that's been incredibly successful in the Ali Act that doesn't get credit, is the provision on coercive contracts that.
Yes.
Before, I mean, that's how they stopped the Don King practice of options that no longer exists in American boxing, at least in America.
That's right. That's right.
And
if you were to ask Mike Hunter, he's in a dispute with Don King right now because King sent him, and this is not just Mike Hunter. King still sends out contracts with coercive options. So more sophisticated fighters don't sign it.
Yeah, but they protest it or contest it in court afterwards, I guess there's that. I mean, because I've heard of incidents where boxers, it seems like you read the contract they were given to fight in the title fight, and I'm like, that is an obvious coercive contract, but it never was challenged when it looks obvious that they could have challenged it. So I guess it's up to the boxer has to be aware, and him and his team have to challenge those provisions.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Now the other thing about this that I think is missed by a lot of fans is there was an antitrust element to the Ali Act, because if you read the legislative history, you read the reports and the testimony, there is some references that go all the way back to when the Estes Kefauver did the first hearings in 1960 following the International Boxing Club of New York, where they discuss how the use of the titles and coercive contracts and options was a way that promoters could, and they specifically say this, monopolize weight classes, take advantage, monopolize the divisions. And so that is one aspect I think has been ignored, is that it was intended to block monopoly. And I think it's worth noting too is that since the Pass the Alley Act, up until today, I guess we could say, there has been no monopoly over boxing. So it seems to have worked on that front.
Absolutely correct. Although the Kefauver hearings really focused on mob control of boxing, which had dissipated for sure by the time that John McCain got involved.
Yeah, that is true. But the part I'm saying, I guess there's sections of those hearings where they talked about the monopoly methods that the mob used, and they cite specifically the idea that the IBC would have a champion and say the only way you could fight the champion is sign a long-term contract with
Yes, that's correct. And there was a major case which was based on antitrust. In that particular case, the Justice Department did go after them.
Yeah, and they won, and they broke them up and had a remedy and everything. So it was kind of a first. Now that gets us to this new bill, the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act. And I guess if you made a list of all the problems in boxing that people complain about today, that there's not enough co-promotion, I think would be one of the problems people always cite. That there's too many titles, that the rankings are not they're not objective enough, they're not the proper people are rated. Those to me are the kind of the biggest problems fans and media and people in the industry say boxing has right now. I guess my question, long-winded way to say, is what does this new bill do to address those problems?
Nothing.
Exactly.
The bill is intended to favor one entity and one entity only, and that entity is Zuffa Boxing, which is an offshoot of UFC, of course.
Mm-hmm.
It is modeled after what UFC does. Of course, UFC has had antitrust issues. As I recall, they had to pay $375 million to fighters. And I think that there was one aspect of that which may still be going on.
Yeah, there's several there are several outstanding or potential class actions still going.
Yeah, so what they would like to do, meaning the Zuffa Boxing, is to do the same thing with boxing.
Now, this UBO structure, Unified Boxing Organization, that they put there, that it seems specifically designed for TKO, as you noted, because it lists a bunch of requirements to be a UBO, and these are things that UFC already has, so it would be like a minimum cost barrier for TKO to do. Plus, they're making guaranteed money from the Saudis, so the Saudis would cover those costs anyway.
That's correct. Yes.
And yet every other promoter would look at these. When you look at the margins other promoters work with, these would be major barriers for them to operate as UBOs.
Well, the margins are very, very different. That came out in the antitrust case.
Mm-hmm.
The margins that major promoters have are much less than the profit margins, because the fighters get paid more. Profit margins, that is, of a UFC.
Yeah,
fighters get paid more in boxing than proportionally than the fighters do in MMA.
Yeah, and I would argue, and I think the antitrust case and the history of boxing kind of points out the reason for that in boxing is because there is no single entity monopoly controlling the sport. And so I'm guessing the passage of this bill, the only way this bill fixes the problems I cited earlier is if they can somehow monopolize boxing and make it that their title is the one title like the UFC.
Which I doubt is going to work, but that is the goal.
Well,
the goal of the bill.
Yeah. So the goal is, it seems, intent to let them try to do what they did in the UFC and roll up boxing as a monopoly, which the next question would be, I guess, that's the intent to monopolize with the bill. I have a question of why do you think are you suspicious of the ABC support of this bill then?
ABC in my view, does not support it. The board of directors voted to support it, but that decision was not ratified by the membership at the recent ABC conference.
That's my understanding as well, that it was kind of a speedy vote by a select few members of the board, but it wasn't brought before the rest of the members. Why do you think that is? Why would they, not bring it to the rest of the members and kind of fast track the support?
It was discussed very heavily at the recent ABC conference.
Mm-hmm.
There was substantial disagreement with the bill. In order to endorse a bill or anything else, it would take a ratification by the full ABC at its conference, and that did not happen.
Okay. Do you think there will be any pushback from ABC and other members of the boxing community? Because I know you wrote a strongly worded letter. It sounds somewhat comical, but you wrote a letter against the bill. There has been some comments by promoters, but there doesn't seem to be much organized effort so far, I've seen.
Oh no, there is a considerable effort. I'm getting stuff weekly from different people opposing the bill. Right now, remember, Congress is in recess. So the bill's not moving forward. Nothing's happening. When and if hearings are scheduled, there's going to be considerable opposition by many people.
Do you think that opposition is going to be centered on the House or on the Senate?
Well, I think that the first set of hearings, if they do this the way that the Muhammad Ali Act was done, would come from the House. But with the Senate and the House being in the state that it is, I can't read those tea leaves.
Yeah, it's easy to see something like the Epstein case taking over the Congress to the point where they can't even get a vote on anything else for a while. So
happened.
Yeah.
What I'm concerned about. Let me explain something about the both acts, Professional Boxing Health and Safety Act and the Muhammad Ali Act. There were 2 years of hearings before the act was ever introduced, getting input from knowledgeable people. There was there was a bipartisan group of attorneys general that did an investigation and a report. I was an advisor to that group as well. All before the act was introduced. That is not what happened here.
Yeah.
The act was introduced without that sort of legwork.
Yeah, and it obviously.
And it was introduced, and let me finish. And it was introduced because there was lobbyists, paid lobbyists, whereas the Muhammad Ali Act was introduced purely because people wanted to help boxers. There was no lobbying in the sense that no paid lobbyists were involved whatsoever.
Well, I mean, I was going to say it's obvious that TKO, the parent company of the UFC and Zuffa Boxing, introduced it because in their earnings calls and interviews earlier in the year or the end of last year, they talked specifically about getting that introduced. And then they have a bill design that looks obviously designed just for them. One thing that makes me a little nervous, they seem pretty confident in its passage. And I noticed that where the Ali Act had a 2-year grace period before it went into law, this bill goes into law 30 days after being signed.
And that should make you nervous, but that's what the bill says.
The other thing about the Ali Act and this bill, Obviously, they feel that the Ali Act prevents sanctioning or promoters from having their own titles because of the even if it doesn't specifically say that, it's the idea that you can't at least control the title because you can use that for a coercive contract. But the way this bill is written, not only can you be a UBO and have your own titles, but you can ignore the rest of the Ali Act, it looks like. So you don't have to do disclosure, and also you can engage in what seem like obvious coercive contracts without having the minimum or the 1 year maximum length to a coercive contract provision. You don't have to follow that at all. So I guess
Well, let's define for your audience what a coercive contract is. A coercive contract is a contract that, well, there's several possibilities, but one is you're in a what's known as a mandatory situation. Your boxing fans will understand that, your MMA fans may not. That's where a rating organization periodically says that the champion has to fight the leading available contender. You are not allowed under the Ali Act for coercing future rights in that situation. No promoter can do that. Now, if it's not a mandatory situation, there is a time limit for future rights that can be demanded. So I just thought it would be useful for your members, your listeners.
No, I appreciate
what we're talking about.
I appreciate that, and hopefully they've listened to my other episodes because we went very in depth about all this. But it's good always to summarize for new listeners, and I always forget to do that. I assume everybody's listening to everything I do. But the part about the coercive contracts is basically, if I have a fighter that you want to fight, let's say the champion you want to fight, if you're a mandatory, I can't make any demands on you. But if you're not a mandatory, but you want that fight, you're signed to another promoter and you want that fight with that champion, I can't demand that you sign an exclusive deal for over 1 year to get that fight. That's the gist of it. But this UBO says, I mean, the whole thing seems like a violation of that, because it basically says you have to be signed with the promoter even to take fights with UBO boxers, or you have to be signed with the UBO. And I guess my point is or my concern is, by getting rid of the other Ali Act protections, they're basically saying, you have no protections against these coercive contracts. This whole structure is set up so that we can do nothing but coercive contracts.
Yes.
Which is,
correct.
Which is the argument against in the antitrust case against the UFC, is that how they gain their monopoly power there is by demanding people sign with them exclusively. And the only way you'd get the big fights is then you'd sign with the UFC then. Now, the other thing I find interesting is, at least publicly, there's all this kind of support or discussion about this new bill. But I haven't seen anyone bringing up or trying to bring back the Professional Boxing Amendment Act, because, correct me if I'm wrong, immediately after the Ali Act was passed, there were hearings and reports written by Congress, held in the Senate, to go over what was working and not working in the Ali Act. And from that, they crafted a new bill. The Professional Boxing Amendment Act was supposed to address all these complaints people currently have about what the Ali Act isn't doing.
The Ali Act is not perfect.
Yeah.
And you're completely correct. Ultimately, what John McCain was going to do, and I know this because I talked to him, was to propose a federal boxing commission. A couple of things happened. Number one, he ran for president. That took his focus. He was switched from Commerce Committee to some other committees, major committees, and ultimately he took ill and died. So he was never able to reach his ultimate goal there. And he was the leading light, so to speak, in terms of the Congress, who there were interestingly, there were other folks who were knowledgeable about boxing at one point.
Is that
Bill
so?
Richardson of New Mexico. John Kerry, believe it or not, was very knowledgeable. But neither one of those remains in Congress.
Yeah. Is that one of the problems you think today? Is there's not as many boxing fans in the Congress today that are knowledgeable about it, except for I guess Ilhan Omar.
I really can't answer that because I don't know who is and who isn't. I didn't know until I was at a hearing that Kerry was as knowledgeable as he was. Bill Richardson, I did know because he was more public. You know, it all depends on things that I don't know in terms of who's knowledgeable.
Yeah. The going back to that Professional Boxing Amendment Act that I suppose was going to address a lot of the what they saw as the faults or the weakness of the Ali Act, what it could have, how to improve it. One thing to note too is that it was heavily lobbied against. Passing that bill was Zuffa heavily lobbied against it.
Well, Zuffa did not want to be regulated. The reason that MMA was not in the original bill was that at that point, John McCain felt, and I'm going to quote him, that MMA was like human cockfighting. Didn't like it. He did change his views over time. Remember, the MMA rules have changed as well. And there are rules now that didn't exist back then.
Yeah, they also sold it. There was a specific marketing campaign in the 90s that made it even more. They hyped up the violence and the lack of rules that probably made it even seem more barbaric.
Yeah, but that was because of public relations. And any entity that in my opinion, any entity that gives you something like slap fighting doesn't care that much about fighters.
That's true. I'm not going to argue with that. So I guess my question is, I mean, is there any chance maybe that they dust off the Professional Boxing Amendment Act and that gets some support in light of the, as in replacement of trying to pass this new bill that basically guts the Ali Act, instead go back to the bill that was meant to.
I don't think there's much chance of that right now. I don't see the support for that. I don't see the knowledgeable people in Congress who would move in that direction. To put it bluntly, Trump is a friend of Dana White, and nobody is a friend of the boxer.
Yeah. And do you think that makes it more likely this might pass? Because it seems, at least from my point of view, it seems very likely in the House that just by Trump supporting Dana White and Ari Emanuel, he's friends with both of them, that at least and they have at least the illusion that it's bipartisan, with Sharice Davids being as a co-sponsor, that they can get it passed in the House relatively easy, but the Senate might be a problem where they have to get at least 7 Democrats to cross over.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
That's all I can tell you is we'll see.
Yeah. Now, if this is passed, what do you think what's your worst case scenario fear for the future of boxing? And what do you think is the most likely scenario?
I think in the short term, boxers will be harmed. The ones who sign up under this, they end up being harmed. In the long term, I don't know that this entity is going to be successful. I question whether they're going to be successful, but we'll see. I'm not really good at gazing into a crystal ball. I can certainly see pitfalls coming in the future, but as you said before, you don't know if there's going to be an Epstein situation that will take everybody's eyes off this bill, or a war directly involving the United States.
Yeah.
as opposed to what's going on now.
Yeah.
There's so many things that can happen
Now, speaking
that
of the
I can't predict.
Now, speaking of the current boxers, the one thing I noticed about this bill or the contracts, we have copies of some of the contracts that are being offered to fighters to sign under this organization. It's not a league. I always want to note that they pretend they're a league, but it's not a league. But this future UBO, the contracts pay is based on rank. But do you find it troublesome that the contract pay is based on the fighter's rank, but the rank is solely in that promotion and controlled by the promotion? And so, in other words, your
Yes.
pay, for listeners, your pay, yes, you get paid the higher you're ranked, but they determine how high you're ranked.
Well, so let's take the heavyweight division very quickly. None of the big fighters are going to sign up with this because the money is not going to be there for them. I don't see any of the major fighters embracing this. Now, the major fighters are the highest ranked fighters. So these will be the lesser fighters who are ranked by this organization. That doesn't mean that they end up as the lesser fighters because people grow. But at least initially, by and large, these are for the lesser fighters.
My concern is that this will turn into kind of an IBC of New York situation where with the Saudis, with all the money they have, TKO has with the WWE and UFC, that they can pay a lot for select few top fighters. And because of the nature of sports, you want to be the number one fighter. And when you're the number one fighter, you make more money. That they can use that and then have these lesser known, cheaper fighters, exclusive contracts, let them exclusively fight these top guys to the point where the fans, if they ever beat the top guys because they get old, because that's what happens in sports, the fans now recognize these people that were exclusively under UFC contract as the new top guys.
I don't know that that's accurate. Remember that MMA was created for all intents and purposes in terms of the general public by the UFC. So they got the best guys. I don't see that happening in boxing because there is an established pecking order already in boxing. And I'm talking about fighters now.
Yeah.
I don't see, for instance, Bivol and Beterbiev signing up for this. And in order to have that third match, they both have to sign up.
Yeah. Well,
don't see that.
Well, let's say that because they are working with the Saudis have Bivol and Beterbiev signed up to them. And they're signed to a long. I
can't speak to what the contract rights are because I represent Bivol.
Yeah. But I'm just using that as just a man. Well, any of let's say the top two fighters in any weight class who are obviously the best, and they're going to get paid a ton of monies by the Saudis. But in the future, they will end up fighting just the people that are signed exclusively to TKO, let's say, in the future. I'm just wondering if that would drive even the top fighters to say, well, the fights are being denied to me against these top guys. I've got to sign with TKO. And maybe at first, this Zuffa boxing pays them, a little more what they're getting now, but less than what they could have got under a completely free market. But over time, they can keep, keeping the boxer pay flat and raising revenues by selling more and more rights, stuff like that, and then bringing the revenue down.
Possibility.
Yeah.
I can't see into the UFC Zuffa crystal ball.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah. But I think it just strikes me as likely they're shooting not the mob tie part, but they're shooting for the IBC of New York kind of model, which is the UFC model in many ways.
Yeah, that's the case that involved the mob.
Yeah.
Blinky Palermo and bad guys.
Yeah. But I'm thinking mostly on just the part where to get a chance at the top fighters, you have to sign with them, and then you're stuck in these contracts that don't let you leave. Just like the IBC. But now, I guess I know that you're leaving soon and stuff, so I thank you for your time. But I'm gonna give you one more, just one more question. I guess and this question is, sorry for the stuttering here, as I'm being distracted. I'm watching my elderly mom, and I got to make sure she doesn't fall over as I'm talking to you. Is that the final question is, what would you like to see the response from the boxing community to this? I mean, not even just to this, I guess to the problems people say boxing currently has.
I'd like to see the community rise up against this proposed bill.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, that's all it is now, is a proposed bill. There haven't been hearings. It hasn't been moved along yet. So it's in its nascent stages. And I'd like to see Congress people, if there are any that are of goodwill, Republicans or Democrats, look at it. And you can't determine, in my opinion, that this is a good bill if you look at it. If you follow what someone tells you to do and you don't look at the bill, you don't exercise independent judgment, well, then it's going to go through.
How about for the other stakeholders, like the sanctioning organizations and the other promoters? Do you have anything you wish to see out of them?
Well, I know that the sanctioning organizations, a couple of them, two of them in particular, have spoken about this privately, and I know they're against it. The two most reputable, well, they're not all the same. Understand that. Some, in my opinion, ranking organizations are more reputable than others. Some don't have 4 heavyweight titles. Is a problem, quite frankly. It's ridiculous. But they're not all quite like that. Understand why the ranking organizations are, and I've sued the ranking organizations more than anyone else, I guarantee you that. But the one thing that they do, if they enforce the rules and if they have fair rankings, those are 2 big ifs. What they do is they give a mandatory shot. People rise up the rankings and eventually get their chance at a title. And if it wasn't for that, Evander Holyfield, as an example, would never have become a champion. I mean, I could name many people. I'm using him because of the name recognition.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
way
yeah, I think
would have allowed it.
I think it's possible you can make the argument Alexander Usyk got his chance because he was a mandatory.
Well, it's more than possible. It's exactly what happened.
And so his vast fortunes that he makes now would have been denied, and his chance to be the best heavyweight in the world.
I represented Usyk. Well, I'm not his regular attorney. I represented him in terms of demanding that right, and he got it.
Wow.
The right to fight for the title.
Mm-hmm. And
still have to do that.
Mm-hmm. And for the promoters, do you think there's any actions they could take?
Well, I know that Top Rank, I don't think I'm talking out of turn, is very much against this. I saw that Nico Ali Walsh, Muhammad Ali's grandson, came out against this recently. I don't know whose names I'm at liberty to use. I think it's fair to say that some major boxing figures, both boxers and people well known and responsible in the industry, are going to come out against this. But I'm not sure whether they want me at this stage to use their names or not. So,
okay. Well, on that, Yeah.
Um,
Well, we can leave it with that, sir. I really appreciate you coming on, Mr. English. And I hope maybe I can have you again on in the future if this bill
well,
makes any progress.
good luck to you and good luck to your mother.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. And now for my interview with James Quinn. Today we have a very special guest. It is James Quinn. He's been called a super attorney. That is not hyperbole. He's multiple times been named a top 10 trial attorney by the National Law Journal, the top trial attorney numerous times by Chambers, and has been involved in some of the biggest cases. We are just going to focus on his sports history here, where he has served as the lead trial counsel to NFL players in their antitrust suit against the NFL. He has also counseled and represented the players' associations in the MLB, the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, and Major League Soccer, and is author of one of the best books about the sports industry, a book I've commented on and quoted many times on the show. Don't Be Afraid to Win: How Free Agency Changed the Business of Pro Sports. So welcome, Mr. Quinn.
Well, I'm glad to be here, John.
We're really happy to have you here. Now, this show, I'm sure you're a big fan. I'm sure you've never heard the show, but anyways, this show is about combat sports. We cover boxing and mixed martial arts,
Right.
the business side of the sport. So you are, even though technically you have much more experience with the stick and ball sports, I thought you're a perfect person to bring in because there's a lot of debate in combat sports about the nature of the sport, how to regulate it, how to improve athlete pay. And you have been hands-on in the other sports and documented in your book how they improve their pay. So my first question I think would be good for you to bring up is, which is kind of the thesis, I think, of your book, is how important free agency is to athlete pay.
Well, I mean, obviously, it's critical, certainly in the context of team sports, but I think it would also be the case in individual sports. The ability to have people competing for your services, which is really the basic concept of free agency, is critical to making sure that you're going to get compensated for your talents in the sports world.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your book, you bring up many examples, but of examples of incidences that increase the free agency and how that leads to higher wages. But there's also this relationship with unions and collective bargaining. I guess, what is the relationship between collective bargaining and athlete pay? Another way to put it? Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Another way to put it is that the collective bargaining is important as free agency, or do you need collective bargaining to get free agency? How does that work?
Well, I mean, typically back in the day, the way we got free agency was in the first instance, through litigation, but antitrust litigation, competition litigation. But it was typically sponsored by one or more of the unions. That's how the players could get together jointly to bring litigation that could bring about free agency. Eventually, once free agency was established in the different sports, then collective bargaining became critical because that's the way that you protect the rights of the players or the athletes.
Yeah. I mean, baseball seems to be a good example of that, because look at the history of baseball and you look at the finances, the estimates that Scully and Zimbalist came up with, is that baseball had a union for decades. That Marvin Miller was in charge of it, very effective in organizing the athletes, but the percentage of pay going to the players was something like 17% in the early 70s.
Correct.
And it's only when, after they got the reserve clause weakened and removed, that you saw the pay skyrocket to the percentage where they got, I think by early 80s, over 40%.
Yeah, probably closer in today's world, it's closer to 50%.
Yeah.
And that was because of their ability to have teams, bid for their services, which is what free agency is all about.
Yeah. And you also see in the other sports at the time that the when wages went their highest is like with the NBA is when the ABA was around. NHL,
competition does. Yeah. It's amazing what competition does when how it can positively affect the athletes. And that was true when there was rival leagues, the ABA and the NBA, and earlier in the 60s, the AFL, before it merged with the NFL. That competition had an enormous impact on player salaries.
I think they even detected a slight increase in salaries when the USFL was around against
There
the
was
NFL.
to some degree, yeah. There was once again for those few years, 3 or 4 years, there was bidding wars, and it improved the lot of the football players.
Mm-hmm. And this is the reason I bring this up is because this is kind of the big argument in combat sports where I don't know if you follow, I'm sure you follow boxing a little bit, but I don't know if you follow mixed martial arts at all. But in combat sports, boxing has much more of a freewheeling, multiple promoters, multiple sanctioning organizations. So the pay for the top guys, at least, is very, very high, where MMA is controlled by one promotion, has 90% of the global revenues is the estimate. And the athlete's share of those revenues is less than 20%. So there's often arguments to the athletes organized collectively bargain, which probably is not even possible, or is the increasing competition should be the objective for the combat sports world?
Well, I think in the first instance, trying to get increased competition should be the objective, but it may be the only way that can come about is through collective bargaining. I know there has been some litigation in the MMA world, and frankly, I don't know how that has played out.
Yeah, that has played out in that there was a settlement on the first antitrust lawsuit that covered the period from 2010 to 2017. They settled for $375 million, but there was no injunctive relief that they're asking for. But there is an ongoing litigation for fighters that fought from 2017 until now that is asking for injunctive relief, that they're trying to get some sort of limits on contract, some provision, increased competition, hopefully. So we will see.
Yeah. Well,
now,
I mean, that's ultimately how other sports succeeded in getting what would basically be a much fairer share. I mean, obviously, in the major team sports, the revenues are shared more or less equally. It differs slightly in sport to sport, but it's somewhere around the 50-50 range.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna ask you about that, but one thing I want to bring up is what I loved about your book is how much time you spent talking about the individual athletes and the part they played in increasing wages or getting rights for athletes, because usually that's something that's kind of skipped, I think, in these type of stories, is that the athletes are just passive. But one guy in particular, reading your book, it hit me that he perhaps might be the greatest sports hero ever, and he doesn't get the credit, is the Big O, Oscar Robertson.
Yeah, and there's no question that his role in getting free agency in basketball was critical. And one of the things that's important in all of these sports is to have players stand up, and it particularly players who are athletes that are at the top of their game, as Oscar was. And similarly in football, when in the John Mackey case, Mackey was a great leader in football, and obviously Gene Upshaw played a critical role in getting free agency. Even though he wasn't a player by then, he was running the NFLPA union. Having leaders like that stand up is critical in making sure that the players get a fair deal.
Yeah. Well, I just go back to Big O, because in some ways I think he should be talked about in the same light as Kurt Flood. And maybe modern players should all be sending him a check, because the reason they're so rich is because he had the foresight that he became the leader of the union, the Players Association, but he attached his name to an antitrust suit to prevent the merger of the ABA and NBA. I might be citing, referencing this wrong, but ABA and NBA that kept the wages super high, and then they only allowed that merger after they basically allowed free agency in.
That's how we got the case ultimately settled. The merger was not going to go through until we attained free agency, and it was the first free agency in professional sports. Baseball followed soon after, and then it took a while to get football and hockey. Yeah,
just again, the guy should have a statue in every players' locker room in the NBA because
Yeah, I spoke to him recently, and he agrees he should have a statue.
he should. He's not, but again, what I liked about the book is you cite Dave Cowell. You cite multiple guys that I've never even heard of on the. Now I've heard of them as players because I'm a big old basketball fan, but never heard of their impact on the Players Association side. But you bring up incidents where multiple players played a part. I thought that was nice about the book. Now. Talking about that antitrust suit, there's something interesting seemed to happen in the 80s, which you kind of chronicle in the book, is that the big leagues, the unions, they transitioned in that period. I think the NBA is the first one that came up with the idea, but then the NFL really ran with it, is they transitioned from doing strikes, which were proving ineffective of getting what they wanted, to instead decertifying the union and going the antitrust route. Can you explain a little bit about how
Yeah. I mean, we first threatened to do that in basketball in the early 80s or in the mid 80s rather. And that led to a favorable settlement in basketball. And then in football, a year or two later, we actually did decertify the union and bring the litigation that led to the free agency, initially in the Freeman McNeil case, and then ultimately in the what is called the White Settlement that led to free agency in football, which has made players rich, and I should have got a percentage.
Let me sum that up for some of the listeners might be aware of this. I guess is that when you decertify, you have a union, you decertify, you break up the union because unions cannot. They made a ruling. Unions cannot sue for antitrust because we've determined that collective bargaining agreements give antitrust exemptions to those that they have with it. With regard to labor. So they certify the union, that way they can file individual or association-related antitrust cases against these entities. And then you had those big cases in the NFL, the McNeil and then the White being Reggie White versus NFL, which led to free agency. Now, if I'm not wrong, one of the things is that led to the salary split, the cap, or the agreed upon split, because free agency proved so successful for the players that the percentage of revenue going to the players got hit almost 70% very quickly.
At one point, it was close to 70%, and part of the deal was that if it hit a certain number, which it did, then the salary cap would flip into the system, and one of the things that, which is, whether we did it accidentally or we actually, were smart enough to think of this, by tying, and this is particularly true in basketball, but by tying the salary cap to revenue increases, the players' ability to earn a living has skyrocketed, because in the NBA in particular, but also in the NFL, the revenues have gone up enormously, and as a result, the caps in both of those sports has gone up, exponentially.
Yeah, and so one way, I guess, what some fans might miss is that the reason why there's a split between the owners and the players, why they have this set percentage, is not because the players threatened to strike, because as we noted, at least I noted, is that the NFL has tried striking several times in the 80s and they didn't really work. They didn't have the leverage, but is because when they sign a collective bargaining agreement, in other words, the owners agree to give you that split because they want that collective bargaining agreement, because that's the only way to protect themselves against an antitrust suit in the future.
Yes, that's one of the great ironies in professional sports, particularly professional team sports, is that it's the owners who want to make sure there's a union so they're protected under the antitrust laws, and that was that was one of the big arguments at the end of the McNeil and White cases, where they were insisting that we reorganize as a union in order to be protected, which we finally did.
Now, one thing you noted too in the book, that you thought the salary cap, or at least the individual salary cap, was a mistake for the players at the time.
Well, I've never been a big fan of salary caps. I look at baseball and it doesn't have a cap, and they're doing fine. But the system, we agreed in basketball, the first salary cap in the early 1980s, because at that time the NBA was virtually bankrupt, and it made sense in order to protect the players to make sure that they'd have a place to play.
Yeah.
ultimately in football, the only way we were only going to get a settlement in free agency was agreeing to some form of salary cap. So, it was like anything else, you make hard decisions, but I'm not a big fan of salary caps.
Yeah, because now, do you think like the European system might be better than what they do with the Premier League and the soccer leagues over there? Because they use a different method where the money seems to be not a problem for some of the players, and that the teams function.
Yeah, no. I believe that in America, and what I mean by that is that competition's a good thing. Obviously, the owners can't help themselves, and that's why they want some protection, because otherwise they think they'll bid themselves into bankruptcy. Well, that, of course, that's their problem. It's not the player's problem.
Yeah. Also, as you noted in the book several times, they seem to exaggerate their financial problems sometimes.
Yeah, there's a lot of whining going on, and has been for years. When Jerry Jones whines, I laugh.
Yeah, I noticed too. Whenever they whine about how they're losing money, whenever the opportunity comes to open the books to see how much they're really losing, they quickly negotiate a settlement because they
they never want to actually show the books.
Yeah, so that's a note, and that fits kind of like what you see in combat sports. The promoters only when they're forced to disclose, and the UFC definitely does not want full disclosure on how much. Well, I guess no one really.
I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah. Now, going forward on that, some sports seem to struggle to get higher wage share, I've noticed, and it seems to be much harder to negotiate when the league is a single entity. And I'm thinking about Major League Soccer here, because they operate as a single entity, Major League Soccer, and their
Right.
wage share has been very low. And then you could probably apply this to the WNBA, which is owned by just a weird conglomerate. And the players, there's really little competition between the teams in those leagues.
Yeah, in terms of bidding for players, that is true. I mean, one of the realities, though, that you have to face is that, for example, with women's basketball, even though it's right now clearly on the rise, it still only generates a fraction of what the men's basketball or football or baseball generate in terms of revenue. So, you're never going to have a situation where they're going to be making something comparable to the men's basketball, because they simply don't generate that much revenue.
Yeah. Well, that's fair, but I guess my argument would be that the percentage they get is extremely low, the percentage of wage share, and part of that is because off the top that they made these deals that these investors in the NBA get to take a huge chunk of the revenue before they even look at the books if the league's profitable or not.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's an issue. Ultimately, they'd have to decide whether or not they're willing to how hard they're willing to fight. Are they willing, for example, in the WNBA, are they willing to decertify the union and bring litigation?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's up to them.
Yeah. And then Major League Soccer, I guess, has the kind of the same problem, where the only real competition for players is, the top guys is the European leagues or overseas, because they function together, and European Major League Soccer, I think their wage share is something like 25% to 28% of the revenue go to the players, and that's probably due in part to the select few European stars that they signed.
I think that's probably right. And look, the fact that MLS has developed itself as a, quote, single entity, we attacked that at one point, and unfortunately, I wasn't directly involved, but one of my colleagues was. The court upheld the single entity concept because they were structured in that way, and that clearly has an impact on the players' percentage.
And this goes kind of hand in hand with what the UFC is, because the UFC functions as a self-contained entity. So unlike boxing, where boxing, there's a promoter and then there's a separate entity. It's a sanctioning organization that has the title. So multiple boxers compete for the titles, and the promoters have to compete for those boxers. In the UFC, they control their own title, and so the only way to fight for the title in the structure is you have to sign with the UFC. So basically, fighters are competing with each other for the favor of the promoter, who's not competing for the fighter. But this seems very similar to what in Major League Soccer. So the problem is, how do you increase, and I guess in soccer, how do you increase competition if it's a single entity? And then in the UFC case, I guess you would have to attack it by the way to get more
Well, I
wages.
mean, one way would be to try to form a separate competing organization run by the athletes.
That interesting concept. It's something we pitched with have a fighter controlled sanctioning organization, but that seems to be the argument in MMA is so. A lot of fans and fighters will say what has to happen in MMA is the fighters have to organize as a union and like go on strike to force the UFC to give them a higher wage.
Well, I mean that's another alternative, and if you could get enough of the top fighters to do that, then they would have the leverage because the biggest thing you can do is withhold your services.
Yeah. Is it a problem though if the fighters are classified as independent contractors? Does that make that harder or not?
It makes it slightly harder, although you would argue that in effect that they are really employees.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that the chances that like the UFC would be successful in suing the fighters if they were organized are quite low.
Yeah. Now, the organizing the fighters, though, seems like a massive hurdle because unlike the league sports where like NFL plays, every team plays on that weekend. So if they all sat out, you lose a week. UFC has one event every week. So they really, looking at the 87 example in NFL, where I think within 2 weeks, 10 to 15% of the roster crossed the line on the NFL.
Hey, listen, John, I'm not suggesting it's easy. What I'm saying is that if that's what they want to do, then if they feel strongly enough, that's probably their most effective weapon.
Or the more effective weapon, I guess the question is somehow creating competition, increasing competition. Or
I think those are the two alternatives.
Well, we're back to, I wrote an article years ago, which I think I cited you many times and called collective bargaining or competition about the debate, which way to go. So we're back to that. Now, the other players that seem to have problems getting higher wage share is another type of independent contractor, and that's like tennis players, because even though they're independent contractors, there's not a single entity because of the structure of the sport. It's a tour, is that there is no competition for them because there's a series of high profile events they have to appear in if they want to.
Well, John, you may know that I'm co-counsel in litigation that we just filed against the ATP and the WTA.
Yep.
For that very reason.
Yeah, and there's a reason why I brought that question up. So what is we're
going to fight that?
Okay. And this is an interesting point I want to bring up too. I don't know if you know, in boxing, when they did the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act, they cited the example of how Wimbledon, if you could control something like Wimbledon, that would effectively give you a monopoly because you feel compelled. And I think it works the same even if no one controls Wimbledon. You feel compelled to compete in Wimbledon. You feel compelled to take part of this tour, but you have no way to force bidding for your services. There's not multiple
in addition to that, you have to look at the slams a little bit differently than the tours. But the fact of the matter is that there's essentially an overarching price fixing conspiracy because they all agree how much tennis players can make.
Mm-hmm. And now, what would you think would be the better solution for the tennis model? What would you think would help the athletes?
Well, I think in looking at the tours themselves first, and then the slam separately, the tours, the individual events should be able to set their own prices in terms of how much players can earn in that event, rather than having a schedule that's set forth by the ATP.
Yeah, and that way that each
event, in other words, the tournaments would compete with each other for players.
Yeah, exactly. So each event some event would raise the price, hoping to get all the bigger profile tennis players to show up, and then,
correct.
And then the other ones would feel compelled. We got to do the same because we want to keep the high profile players coming to our event.
That's what competition is all about.
I want to thank Mr. Quinn, the super attorney, for coming on. Super attorney, what a great title that is to have. Now, I hope you found these two interviews entertaining and informative. If you want more content like this and have not subscribed to the show yet, I recommend you do. And if you want all our content, including boxing and MMA contracts, financial and legal analysis, and much more, I suggest you become a paid member. You can also follow Stephanie and me on social media. Stephanie can be found on Twitter at Crooklyn MMA, and Crooklyn on Blue Sky is her handle. My handle is Hey Not The Face on both. You can also email me questions at heynottheface@gmail.com. And with that, to quote Miss Crooklyn herself, please stay safe.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!